Misty, I'm just going to wait for Alder. Oh, he just logged on. Since he's, oh, great. I was waiting for Alder Winter, who will be presenting the resolution. Looks like we have quorum. Misty, we could probably start.
Okay, you are good to go.
If we can have the alders on camera that are part of the committee, that would be appreciated. Welcome, colleagues. I'll read the meeting agenda. Good evening. The City Services and Environmental Policy Committee of the Board of Alders will meet on Tuesday, April 13th, 2021 at 6 p.m. via video conference at https://bit.ly/3IQALSQ and by phone at 646-558-8656. Webinar ID 987-3664-2645 to hear and act on the following item. For required password, contact public testimony at newhavenct.gov. LM-2021-0032, resolution of the New Haven Board of Alders committing the City of New Haven to a leadership role in electrifying its buildings and vehicle fleet. Per order, Honorable Anna M. Festa, Chair, attest Honorable Michael Smart, City Clerk. These items are on file and available in the office of the City Clerk, room 202 at 200 Orange Street, New Haven, Connecticut, 06510. For accessibility-related accommodations, please call 203-946-7833V or 203-946-8582 TTY TDD. Public comment testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting. If you wish to present testimony at the meeting, you must register in advance at https://bit.ly/3IQALSQ or by calling 203-946-7934 or emailing publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting for the required password. Public can view the meeting at https://bit.ly/3IQALSQ or listen by phone at 646-558-8656, webinar ID 987-3664-2645. The password to listen by phone only is 849-550-9611. At this time, I will allow my committee to introduce themselves, beginning with my vice chair.
Salvi Cola, Ward 18.
Let's see, Alder Winter.
Stephen Winter, Ward 21.
Alder Singh.
Campton Singh, Ward 5.
And Alder Smith.
Alder Smith, Ward 30.
Thank you, colleagues. I would also like to welcome our Majority Leader, Richard Furlow, as well as Alder Adam Marchand, who have also joined the call. Tonight's meeting is to discuss the electrification of City Hall as well as vehicles. At this time, I will call on Alder Steve Winter to present the resolution.
Thank you so much, Chair Festa, and thank you to my colleagues on the committee for hearing this item this evening. This item is focused on the electrification of the city's buildings and of its vehicle fleet, both in setting a goal for electrifying our buildings and our vehicles, and also establishing processes for our city engineer and our chief administrative officer's offices to address those electrification goals. And it also looks at more broadly how the city can play a leading role in encouraging electrification, both through our zoning powers, through advocacy at the state delegation, through economic development, all of the jobs that electrification will bring, and also instructing the Board of Education to pursue electrification, particularly at school buses, but also looking at how to electrify heat and hot water there. So with all of that in mind, why are we focused on electrification? Electrification is a really powerful tool because it allows us to directly address the air pollution that's causing the climate crisis, while also addressing the public health crisis that we're experiencing acutely now, but that we're chronically experiencing year over year, in particularly respiratory illness. So respiratory health issues such as asthma and other respiratory diseases, cancer and heart disease are all caused and exacerbated by poor air quality. That's both indoor air quality, but also our outdoor air quality. So when we look at electrification, we're looking at heat, at hot water, and also at cooking indoors. And then outside, we're really looking at our vehicles, everything from our school buses and our buses to heavy duty trucks and the cars that we drive around every day. So this is really an issue of environmental justice in line with the board's legislative agenda. And it's also an issue of health justice and racial justice, as those who are impacted by poor air quality and issues of respiratory health, as well as those who are most harmed when climate induced disasters strike, tend to be the most vulnerable. Our poorer residents and our Black and Brown residents are disproportionately impacted by these air quality issues. Beyond all of that, there is a real economic development impetus to this. There's tremendous potential for job creation. Each year we are exporting $5 billion on fossil fuels that could be redirected into local green jobs and businesses here in New Haven. And the city, as for the city's budget, the largest personal property taxpayer is United Illuminating. And so as we spur investments in electrification, there are going to be upgrades to the grid, upgrades to transmission and distribution to accommodate that, as well as storage and energy storage and resiliency investments that can materially add to the grand list and help our residents with their property tax burden. So with all of that, by developing mechanisms for continually evaluating our systems and making strategic investments, we can play a leading role in encouraging electrification locally here in New Haven, as well as in the state, and through initiatives like the governor's Transportation and Climate Initiative, focusing on electrifying and cleaning up our transit system. Those investments and that forward-thinking approach can reverberate through the whole region. It's also important to recognize that the costs for these technologies have come way down. So for heating, a lot of folks say, well, I'd never want to do electric heat. They're thinking about the old style resistance heater, right? Like if you look at an old stove with the coils, but electric heat now is really efficiently provided by heat pumps, which are like air conditioners that can operate in reverse. So they can both provide air conditioning to cool, but they can also provide heat in the winter. And we used to only see these devices down south, but recently there have been big advances to allow them to operate in really cold temperatures, well below zero, actually. And then, with electric vehicles, I think we've all come to recognize how much that technology has improved in the last decade. And many folks believe that as close as the next 3 years, the upfront cost of an electric vehicle will equal that of a gas vehicle. And that's to say nothing of the cost to operate those vehicles. So, Consumer Reports, if you've ever read that, looking at like appliances or something, they estimate that over the life of an electric vehicle, you're going to save $6,000 to $10,000 on maintenance, which is a huge issue for the city of New Haven. As we are really hammering our vehicles, you're never going to have to perform an oil change on an electric vehicle, for example. So, with all of that in mind, there's also the backdrop of who's in the White House. And President Biden has announced a really incredible initiative when it comes to both electrifying buildings and producing and deploying electric vehicles. So, his recently released infrastructure plan looks to electrify and retrofit over 1 million buildings, as well as deploy funding to electrify 1/5 of the nation's school buses, as well as leveraging federal purchasing power to help all levels of government to electrify their vehicle fleets. So it's not just that the economics are really improving for electrification. It's not just that there's a huge public health crisis here in New Haven when it comes to respiratory health. We have the 11th worst prevalence of asthma incidents and asthma-related hospitalizations in the whole country. It's not just that, and it's not just the climate crisis. It's also that we need to be prepared and ready to go as federal resources are mobilized to address these issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Winter, for that explanation. At this time, I would also like to note for the record that Alder Carmen Rodriguez and Alder Frank Douglas have joined. Thank you, colleagues for joining the meeting this evening. Misty, it's probably a good idea to let some of our speakers in, such as Rebecca Bombero, Giovanni Zinn, Garrett Eucalito, and I'm not sure who else is here that will be speaking on behalf of the city as well as possibly the state. And I just want the public to know, if you are wanting to present public testimony, that will be later on in the evening once we hear from all the departments. So welcome, Mr. Zinn, Ms. Bombero, as well as Mr. Eucalito. Thank you for joining us. You probably heard what Alder Winter explained to the committee as well as to the public. And it would be great to hear from maybe Giovanni Zinn. I know that we have been touching on this quite a bit in the city and having these conversations about bonding as well as electrifying our fleets and our buildings. If that's okay, we could start with Giovanni, or unless Ms. Bombero wanted to begin. And just as a reminder, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. I noticed Alder Winter has his hand up. I don't know if you had something you needed to say before that, or chair through you, obviously. Alder
Winter, did you have something to add?
Thank you, Giovanni, and thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to also note, maybe I missed it, but that Majority Leader Furlow has also joined us.
Yes, I recognized him earlier. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. My name is Giovanni Zinn. I'm the city engineer. I reside at 95 Soundview Terrace here in New Haven. Thank you again, Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee for having me here. This is an extremely important topic. I think we've talked a lot about over the last years, and in particular in the last year or so, about the climate emergency that faces us here in New Haven and around the world, and the importance of dealing with these issues. And electrification, as Alder Winter did a very nice job of discussing, is a primary tool. It's something that, I'm not going to sit here and talk about what I do in my personal life all the time, but my previous home was fully electrified. I'm working on doing it in my own home. Heat pumps, as Alder Steve Winter talked about, are a wonderful tool. They work really well now, even up here in these climates. And it's something that, I think is very important, and I very strongly believe in on both a personal and a professional level. Of course, my role here is as the city engineers to provide technical advice to the city and to manage a lot of our technical projects. I think the ordinance talks about all the different city buildings. I feel I should probably limit my comments more to the non-Board of Ed buildings, which are more directly in relation to the work of my department. I also want to recognize the efforts of the New Haven Climate Movement, who have done wonderful work, Agatha in particular, and others around electrification, and starting to see the ideas of what electrification for city buildings could look like. And I'm happy to report that we do have various electrification projects in various states right now for different city facilities. For example, we replaced all of the second floor HVAC units in the Whitney Firehouse with units that can both heat and cool, so that can they can get their heat from heat pumps as opposed to relying on the boiler. We are currently in design on a few different projects that are going to be electrified. One is the community building at the ice rink. That will not be using gas for its space heating needs. Instead, we'll be using variable refrigerant flow heat pumps. Also, our parks and public works improvements at 180 Park Road. We're looking to do, again, variable refrigerant flow heat pumps there as well. In terms of our existing building stock, we are looking at the police substation on Blatchley Avenue. We have to replace the 2 rooftop units. That will instead get a heat pump system, and will eliminate gas as a use for for space heating there. Atwater Senior Center and 200 Wintergreen are 2 sort of mid-sized buildings that right now have fossil fuel systems that are end of life. And we're looking to replace those again with heat pumps. Similarly, looking a little further down the road, our City Hall contract and 200 Orange contract for our fuel cell is up in another year. And that's a good time to look again at how we handle our buildings. 200 Orange in particular may be a good candidate for some level of electrification. It gets trickier with larger buildings, especially buildings with large amounts of outside air going into them, but it is something that we've adopted as sort of our first pass of an electric first way of dealing with it. Some of the benefits that we see is better zoning in the buildings. You have smaller, more direct control for the users of the building. You get bailed out of difficult situations. We had an issue at 720 Edgewood with the boiler recently, 2-3 weeks ago. Part of the building was electrified, had heat pumps. We were able to keep staff in there even though the boiler died, and they were able to sit there and be heated by the system. And I think we're now going to do that throughout the rest of the building, and we're going to try to eliminate that boiler there. In terms of cost, something that's very much on my mind all the time, we are getting close to cost parity, depending on exactly the cost of the various different commodities, both electric and gas. What's really special about an electric heat pump is that for every unit of energy you put in, you get multiple units of heat out. Often that's around 3.5 to 4, between 3 and 4. Also depends on the time of year. They perform better in shoulder months, but the new high heat, hyper heat, they've got a few different trade names, but they're new technologies that provide full output or almost full output down to -13. Design day in New Haven is 0 degrees, so we feel fairly confident that our facilities will be well served with these types of units. It is expensive. It can be expensive to retrofit, especially in larger buildings. Those systems are much more sort of attuned and have higher volumes of both air and water flow and things like that that expect the sort of centralized sources of heat like a boiler. But it is something over the next almost decade that we will try to tackle. And I believe there's a year timeline for the city engineer to provide a report. I would clarify that it would be my preference if that report were for non-Board of Ed buildings, because that's kind of more, our purview. But we certainly look forward to being part of this process. And I think we have a few projects both in the pipeline and some that we've done that show the feasibility of this approach. Not everything will be very easy to electrify. I think we're trying to pick off the low-hanging fruit at this point. And there'll be certainly costs associated with it. But I think for now, we can concentrate on some of our small to mid-sized buildings and places where we have end-of-life equipment already. And so with that brief, hopefully, well, not that brief, but that introduction, I'd be happy to take any questions or whatever, Madam Chair, you'd like me to do.
I think at this point, we'll have everyone speak and then the committee can ask questions. But can you just explain the non-Board of Ed, Board of Ed? Is the Board of Ed planning on participating? Just because you mentioned that a couple of times. So just for clarification purposes.
Well, that was more of a discussion of the purview of my department. We really don't have, we manage a lot of the capital projects in non-Board of Ed buildings. We don't do that on the Board of Ed side. So just for my reports, I think it would be more appropriate for me to comment on buildings that we have both experience working with and also, some level of purview on, if that makes any sense.
It does. Yes. And I appreciate that clarification.
Yep.
Ms. Bombero, anything to add? And please just remember, state your name and address for the record, please.
Rebecca Bombero, 122 West Rock Avenue, New Haven, Connecticut. I want to echo Engineer Zinn's comments in support of the resolution and the efforts to make the city more sustainable and environmentally friendly and address some of the health challenges we have here in the community. In terms of the work to date in the city's fleet on vehicles, a lot of effort has been put into carbon reduction. While we have started purchasing some electric vehicles, most of the work to date has been in the hybrid fleet. And we're committed to continuing to review the feasibility of such vehicles and are happy to work towards the established goal of the report within the next 6 months. Just want to caution on the 30/30 deadline because some of the vehicles in our fleet have a life use of over 9 years. Completely transitioning the city's fleet by 30/30 might be challenging, as it would accelerate purchases to replace some of those vehicles. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, I actually forgot to add a couple of comments on the vehicle electrification and its impacts. Certainly, we've actually installed a couple of chargers in city facilities, both at City Hall and 200 Orange. I'm actually one of the people that drives an electric car on behalf of the city. I love it. It's fantastic. It's definitely the future. It is something, as we look to our new facilities in parks and public works and other buildings, to really upsize our services in anticipation of having to charge vehicles, and a fairly large number of vehicles. I think one of the challenges, and I'm sure my compatriot up at the state, Mr. Euclid, will agree, electric vehicle charging is actually a fairly intense activity from an infrastructure point of view. Those are not small electric services that you have to put in. If you're doing, trying to charge, 10 or 20 vehicles rapidly at the same time, that becomes, a building or two buildings in and of itself. It's fairly substantial, but it's something that we're starting to plan for. We certainly believe that the future is electric on vehicles. And it's something that, we have to put in at least the conduits and the space now for it as we build it out as the need arises.
Thank you, Mr. Zinn. For the record, I would like to note that Alder Rosa Ferraro Santana has joined the meeting. Mr. Euclid, is there anything you'd like to add on the state level regarding electrification of not only municipality, but also state, I would think, is looking into this as well? So reminder, just state your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Garrett Euclid. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. I live at 128 Mill River Street in New Haven, Connecticut. So I do have a very brief slideshow on what's going on in the state level and potential federal resources to look for in the future, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Pull that up. So really briefly, I just want to talk about what we're looking at in the state level for clean transportation. As Giovanni mentioned, it is quite expensive to electrify the transportation sector, but we're committed to do that. High level issues, Alder Winter can come campaign with me anytime he wants on the issue of Transportation Climate Initiative, because he hit every single note I'm going to talk about. So I welcome him by my side, but it is transportation is the largest source of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in our state. 67% of all air pollution produced in Connecticut comes from vehicles, and it's 15 to 20% higher in urban communities near our transportation corridors. And 38% of all of Connecticut's greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. So what that means is we're going to see 20 inches of sea level rise. We're going to see more frequent droughts and intense storms. And we're going to see a 5-fold increase in days above 90 degrees by 2050. And that's all what is going to happen if we don't act now to combat climate change. So if we want to address transportation emissions, there are very limited options today for governments, both state and local, to seek funding to decarbonize your transportation sector. 2 of the federal programs that exist today, one is called CMAQ, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality. That's a US DOT formula fund that is given to all states. And the eligible entities are traditionally MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations. So SCROG is the one that New Haven is a part of, and Connecticut DOT. But these are not just for electrification. It's also for, Doug Houseleden will frequently want to convert traffic signals over. That's a use for those. It's anything that can help either reduce congestion or improve air quality. And so this year, there's $12 million total available for the MPOs to apply for. There's also federal discretionary grants. One of them is called LONO, Low Emitting and No Emission Vehicles, which is purely aimed at the transit vehicle space. There have been limited dollars for that in the past. It's been below $100 million a year nationally. Last year, they had $120 million nationally available. This year, the grant period just closed yesterday. They have $180 million available. So it's been increasing as the Congress has been committing to converting transit fleets over to electric. And it's not just CT Transit that can apply. A lot of the paratransit vehicles, such as the Greater New Haven Transit District vehicles, could be converted through a Loan-O grant as well. Alder Winter mentioned the American Jobs Plan. This would be the single, there's never been anything this large to proposed investment in electrification ever in our history. You see there on the screen the breakdown. They proposed $160 billion to electrify transportation. And then I broke it down into the specific categories of what I received from USDOT. $15 billion to build out an EV charging network. They want to build out 500,000 electric vehicle chargers across the country. $100 billion to help consumers purchase electric vehicles, $25 billion for transit vehicles, and $20 billion for school buses. And that's really important for us in Connecticut because we know transit vehicles in Connecticut, Connecticut DOT has 700 of them. We own most of them in the state, but there are the smaller paratransit vehicles that all of the transit districts have. Then there's also some of the other cities have Greater Bridgeport Transit serves the Bridgeport area. Norwalk has a transit district, Wyndham Regional Transit District, and then some of the rural areas as well. So Congress and the federal government have not really provided resources in the past. We're hopeful the American Jobs Plan will provide resources, but we're waiting to see what happens with Congress. So Governor Lamont is proposing to enter a regional effort to help reduce our transportation emissions. It's called the Transportation Climate Initiative Program. So I'm going to quickly walk through that, explain what that is, because that would provide a massive infusion of funding for Connecticut's communities to invest back in clean transportation. And what we did is back in December 2020, Governor Lamont signed an MOU with the governor of Massachusetts, Governor of Rhode Island, and the mayor of the District of Columbia to form the Transportation Climate Initiative Program. And what it does is it sets a limit on carbon pollution from gasoline and on-road diesel. And by putting that cap on the emissions and ratcheting down the cap every year and requiring that the wholesalers and the suppliers of the fuels, those who are contributing the pollution to our community, they would have to purchase allowances to sell their products in our state. And through the purchase of those allowances, TCI would generate $1 billion over 10 years to be reinvested back in Connecticut for clean transportation. And it would reduce carbon pollution and the associated particulate matter and air pollutants that cause asthma and heart conditions and premature death by 26% by 2032. As part of this proposal, we've also committed to establishing an Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Board. And the legislation currently pending in the legislature has 50% of the proceeds that would be generated have to go back into communities overburdened by air pollution or underserved by the transportation system. And that means directly in those communities, not something that would tangentially benefit the community just because the larger pool of vehicles in the state is being electrified. Thereby, if those vehicles are passing through the community, you get a benefit. No, we're talking about 50% of those investments have to go directly into localized emission reduction benefits. We would work with, and by we, it's the DOT and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP. We would work with the Equity Environmental Justice Board and the municipalities in our state to invest that $1 billion. And we know that every community is going to be unique. In New Haven, we know Dr. Mark Mitchell is a public health expert. He testified recently that some of the worst air pollution in the state is at the New Haven Green, because that's where our diesel buses are idling, waiting for passengers. So when you drill down locally to the micro level of a community, you can find those hot spots of air pollution. And that's where communities really need to have a say as to how these investments are made. So Doug Houseledden and Giovanni will be excited because changing out traffic signals can help reduce idling and clean the air in a community. We can invest in bikeable, walkable communities to make it safer for people to walk in their community, to bike in their community, reduce the need to have to make trips by car. Making electric vehicles more affordable and making charging more accessible. That's really important because we know when you look at where electric vehicle charging stations are currently located, there is a commercial sector for that. There's commercial companies out there who are installing chargers, but it's not being installed equitably across the entire state. Rural areas are not having chargers installed. If you live in an apartment building or a multi-unit dwelling, or you have off-street parking or on-street parking and you don't have a driveway or a garage, you probably can't charge your electric vehicle. So how can we make sure that someone who parks on the street or someone who lives in an apartment building, they have access to chargers? And we also have a program in Connecticut called Cheaper, which is providing rebates for people to purchase vehicles. And for the first time ever, we're expanding the program to allow it to be used for used electric vehicles. And you can find a used Nissan Leaf for around $10,000 to $12,000 right now. With rebates, it gets really down to cost parity with an internal combustion engine. Transit buses, I talked about, we have 700 transit buses in Connecticut under Connecticut Transit umbrella. Right now, there's 2 electric buses in Bridgeport already that GBT runs. We will be receiving 12 electric buses from Connecticut Transit in this calendar year. They'll be, I believe 7 of them will be deployed in New Haven this calendar year. So we're excited for that. And we're excited to convert all 700 of them over, but it's going to require significant, and I'm talking close to $1 billion worth of capital investments to do the charging infrastructure alone in our 18 transit facility garages. School buses, there's 6,000 school buses in the state of Connecticut. To convert all of them over, we're talking a very large amount of capital investment to do the charging infrastructure needed. But it's a huge opportunity to remove the diesel particulate matter from the lungs of our children and our family members who are waiting for the bus every single day, either going to school or from school. And it's a huge cost saving for communities as well. Rail service, again, is a key driver to get people off the roads. We're looking forward to expanding service on the rails. And a big thing for us, and I'm excited about, is expanding bus service in Connecticut, serving areas currently unserved, increasing frequency, increasing hours of service, getting more people onto the bus system, making it more convenient for everyone to use, not just within the community, but interconnecting the systems and making it easier to get around our entire state. So that's what the Transportation Climate Initiative can allow us to do. We're excited about that. I'll just end that slide there and just touch on a couple other points where Giovanni mentioned the charging infrastructure. That is a very high cost driver for any municipality and the state. We're trying to electrify our light duty vehicle, our personal passenger cars in Connecticut DOT. And we're looking at upwards of $1 or $2 million just on our Newington headquarters, not talking about our other buildings all across the state. We have acquired the first 3 vehicles, but again, right now, electric vehicles cost more per month for us to lease than a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle. So that is a cost barrier for us to do our full fleet conversion, but we're committed to getting there, and we're hopeful as battery costs come down, as vehicle costs come down, we'll be able to achieve that. We know at the DOT, though, we'll still have some vehicles that can't be converted over in the near term. Our medium duty vehicle trucks, definitely our snowplows can't be converted over right now. A lot of the pickup trucks that we use on the roads every day. I know Hummer just came out with a new electric vehicle. I don't think taxpayers want to see us driving that around. So we're going to have to wait till something cheaper comes out. But the only other thing I'll flag, and there needs to be a solution to this, and it doesn't exist yet. PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, is working right now to try and set up a rate structure for charging electric vehicles. Right now, we ran into this issue in Bridgeport when we tried to charge those buses. the energy load to charge them was so high, it spiked the costs for Greater Bridgeport Transit. It's called a demand charge. So until PURA sets those rates, it's going to be prohibitive for any municipality, any state government to do a bulk charging of our fleet. But we're hopeful that PURA will rule on that this year and we'll be able to move forward. So happy to answer any questions when it gets to that point, but just wanted to walk through what us in the state are doing.
Thank you, Mr. Ucolito. That was a very good presentation, giving us a broader spectrum of what to expect in the future. And 2032 is going to be here quicker than we think. For the record, I'd like to note that President Alder Walker Myers has joined the call, as well as Alder Abby Roth. Thank you for being here tonight. At this time, I will open it up to the committee members. If Mr. Zinn and Ms. Bombero don't have anything to add to any, okay. So I will start with my vice chair, Alder DeCola. Do you have any questions for our panel?
Yes. First question. The grid for in New Haven, can it support this amount of use of our electric consumption going forward, seeing that the Connecticut grid is aging? Will it support it? First question.
I guess as the engineer, I have to take that one. I don't fully know the answer to that. That's a question that's more for the utility. Excuse me. I would think that at least for the foreseeable future, these demands will not represent a huge spike. Also, if people are charging, for example, overnight, that's not a time of great demand, so that the infrastructure can take that up relatively easily. Also, talking about building electrification, right now the grid is driven by summer cooling loads as opposed to winter heating loads. So you basically just see the similar loads that what you see in summer and winter if you're using a heat pump. So I don't think that necessarily changes it. One of the benefits of using something like VRF technology is that it's substantially more efficient than for cooling than a regular air conditioner. A regular air conditioner is a heat pump. This is a more efficient version of that, and so the cost per cooling goes down. So that's a sort of short-term vision of it. I think in the medium and long term, especially as people start doing a lot of rapid charging, you'll see I assume UI and Eversource and ultimately Pura will have to work on that.
Well, thank you. And then second, if we do go forward with this, and most likely I can see we will we increase manpower of electricians to work in the city? So we do it internally on some of this for maintenance, or would this all be contracted out?
I mean, I think the bulk of our sort of larger electric work is contracted out. That being said, it's it's not particularly complicated electrical work to add a heat pump system, as opposed to, it's really no different than adding an air conditioner. And even replacing a boiler, while the boiler doesn't use as much electricity, they are relatively complicated to wire with all the different controls and such. So I don't necessarily see a huge change in the electrician demand, if you will, from this, from our normal course of business. But there'll be some uptick, but I don't think it'll be anything particularly notable. Electric vehicles will require some fairly substantial electric installations, and I think that would be beyond the abilities of our in-house forces, by and large. If we're doing a couple of vehicles here and there, then that's something that's pretty trivial to do, and any electrician can do it. But if you're doing something for 20 buses, that's a fairly large installation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to Alder Roth. Any questions for our panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to apologize for arriving late and missing most of your presentation. I had to come from another city meeting, so my apologies.
No worries. Thank you for letting us know. Do you have questions, or should I move on to Alder?
No, that's why I was, thank you,
Okay.
Madam Chair. I was sort of apologizing to the speakers that I missed since I didn't hear their remarks. I don't really have questions on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Roth. Alder Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Deputy or Acting CAO, Deputy CAO Bombero. Would it be helpful operationally to adjust the language to allow for, some vehicles that have the longer lifespans to run after the 2030 date, but keep that date for new vehicles and replacement vehicles?
I would think open-ended would be the best until such time as we're able to complete the 6-month report. As Deputy Commissioner Acalito said, there's a number of vehicles where there aren't really suitable electric alternatives right now, like those really large snowplows that you see clearing our roads of snow. And to tie ourselves to a date, not knowing what will be available is a somewhat difficult challenge.
It is, but there are other cities that have done it, right? Like, Boston, for example, has set a goal. I think theirs is 2035. And I think setting the goal is important because it helps structure decision making from that point on. And it does seem like the costs are going down. So I think, I thought what I heard you saying was that for 2030, there would be some vehicles whose lifespan would outlast that, and that would increase the replacement rate, which would be a cost burden in and of itself. Is that correct?
That is correct. And in addition to Deputy Commissioner, sorry, I apologize. The Deputy Commissioner's comments, there are some vehicles where, while we hope that there's a suitable replacement within the next 10 years, it's not on the market yet. So there's just some hesitancy in a fixed date, not knowing when those options will be available.
If I may add on to Ms. Bombero's comment there, it's not only the availability of the vehicle, but also the availability to charge the vehicles within our duty cycle. Like, for example, I think electric vehicles would be great for our police cruisers, right? They do a lot of things that police cruisers need. Police cruisers idle a lot because of the electronics in the vehicle. What I haven't figured out in my mind, and I'd love to hear input on, is how do we keep these cars on the road for 3 shifts a day and find the time, even a 20-30 minute rapid charge, to keep them, moving 24 hours a day. I think that's something that's coming and coming soon. That's the sort of thing where the electric service for that charging infrastructure is going to be equivalent to probably at least the size of the building. And then we also need to, in that case, provide backup power as well. We can't have there is a history in Connecticut in the last few years of losing power, not in New Haven for a week, but, it can happen. And we can't lose our police fleet in the meantime. So we'd have to, it's a fairly large, as much cost of the cruisers is, I think to Garrett's point earlier, the charging infrastructure, it can get pretty steep, especially as you try to sort of mass charge vehicles.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Winter. Alder Singh, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is primarily for Garrett. In where the states are in future of the EV charging station, for these cars that would be coming out, Are there any plans going forward for EV charging station? If so, where are we with that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There are commercial companies that provide the service, EV charging services. One of them is EVgo. Another one's called ChargePoint. There's one company that was stood up after the Volkswagen scandal called Electrify America. And they're really targeting their installation of EV charging in heavily traveled areas or where there's large concentrations of electric vehicles. So like the chicken and the egg scenario, they went where the EVs were already there and they're placing them. Tesla is another company, but they do charging only for Tesla vehicles. So if you own a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Bolt, you can't charge at a Tesla facility. So I put those to the side because that doesn't serve everyone. We're looking to, right now, what we're trying to do is, if the federal government moves forward with their plans, if we're able to secure passage of the Transportation and Climate Initiative at the state level, we're going to have funds to invest to build out charging infrastructure where it's not currently located or where it's not commercially viable. And we want to support people. We also want to support businesses who may be left behind in the electric transition. So like GM has announced they're going to stop producing internal combustion engines in 2035. So what about the gas station owners? We want to make sure that we can financially support the gas station owners, help them install some fast chargers so you can spend 20 minutes and charge your vehicle. Maybe they reform their business model where they have food service while you're charging, like if you go to some of the larger service, like Cumberland Farms and stuff like that. So the small businesses, we want to make sure the small businesses in our state are not put out of business when electric vehicles become more prevalent. But we also want to place electric chargers in heavily traveled areas where there's not the concentration of vehicles today. Just because there's not a large concentration of vehicles today doesn't mean those residents don't deserve to have frequent charging opportunities. So we are preparing like an overlay map. The good thing is every single charger in this country is known and mapped. So we're able to develop that map, overlay it with sensor tracks, overlay it with air quality data, and try and figure out where those gaps are. So we're in that process right now of figuring out where the gaps are and where the logical places are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow-up question to Mr. Garrett. Are there conversations with the automobile manufacturing to buy into this here, so they could be part of this project of install, get invested or be part of the EV charging station because they are manufacturing these vehicles, because these vehicles are going to be manufactured and the EV depend upon purchasing this vehicle and get into this green climate.
Yeah, there absolutely are. So Ford has joined a coalition pushing for passage of the legislation I talked about. GM is involved as well as this group called the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, and they represent all of the American automotive companies other than Tesla, I believe. And so they are working to help. They're partnering with some of those charging companies to support the deployment, because they know that in order for someone to feel comfortable purchasing that vehicle that they're going to be producing, people need to see these charging stations out there. So they are Ford, GM, Nissan, they're all actively engaged. Volkswagen is very actively engaged as well to try and make sure that people have a comfort level and see the charging infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Alder Singh. Alder Smith, any questions for our panel?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the panel for coming out. And also, I am an owner of a hybrid. And I was wondering, I just bought a new 2021, and the way that hybrid charges is through the engine system. Is there any way that we can alleviate the charging system? Because it seems to be more efficient to me, because anytime when I get to a light, if it idles, it runs by the electricity. So no carbon is going into the atmosphere at all. Which to me, it's better because you're not including charging stations, which would seem like it would cost a lot more for the city to add in all of these charging stations instead of getting the car that recycles on the engine and charges up. I just want to hear your take about that. This is for Mr. Garrett.
Yeah, so hybrids are definitely an important solution to addressing the carbon emissions in our communities. I know that DOT, we've had a large number of hybrid vehicles in our fleet. I don't want to speak for the acting CAO as to how many the city has, but we view it as critical to reduce that idling emissions. Unfortunately, if you have vehicles that travel long distances, they're not going to convert over or begin to draw down on the battery. They'll use the burning of combustible fuels to move. So the ultimate goal is to go to pure zero tailpipe, remove that tailpipe entirely. But in the interim, hybrids have to be they have to be the answer to get us, they're that bridge to get us to where we need to be. So it is critical for us to continue to, and the automakers are continuing to produce the hybrids as well, because they realize that as well.
I have one more question, Madam Chair. This is to Giovanni. Sometimes our electric bills go up, right? And I was wondering if there's any way, if we go into electrifying the city buildings, are we going to provide solar to be cost less for the city? That will save money onto the electricity bills. Is that possible of happening?
Yeah, it is happening. We have about 3 megawatts of solar, I think, at last time I checked, on city buildings. We've done that primarily on school buildings. They tend to have the larger size roofs. I think we have some interest, especially with the changing, legislative climate around basically being able to have solar panels off site and being able to use that, looking at other places, such as our landfill possibly, although that has some challenges, or other, unused tracts of land where we can ground mount, also looking at parking lots as well. I think the solar arrays that we have had so far have been very positive from a cost perspective for the city. I think the city's buying electricity retail right now, probably in the 17, 18, 19, 20 cent range. Residential customers, I actually calculated this for myself the other day. It's 24.5 cents is what I'm paying right now for electricity. Our contracts range between about 6 and 11 cents a kilowatt hour, all in from our solar arrays, and we put no money up for them at all. So that's a fairly substantial amount of savings. Getting those types of deals are increasingly difficult due to a relatively long and complex series of events in the Connecticut power market and the way that we regulate solar. But we stand at the ready to try to get some larger arrays. And it would be even interesting to see if there are opportunities for arrays that are located elsewhere for the city to buy into. I know Alder Winter is interested in that.
Thank you, Mr. Zen. I'm sorry, and thank you, Madam Chair. No more questions.
Thank you, Alder Smith, for your questions. I don't know if this should go to Mr. Zinn or Mr. Eucalito, but when it comes down to electrical vehicles, are there any, I don't know the mechanics of it. I'm assuming there's a battery involved. And if there is, what is the longevity of that battery and how do we dispose of it?
So I'll start. Definitely not an automotive engineer, but we've been in discussions with a lot of the auto OEMs, equipment manufacturers, the automotive companies about that very issue. And as the number of electric vehicles are expanding, the recycling opportunities are expanding as well. And I think we saw that here in Connecticut a little bit with mattresses, right, where we stood up a mattress recycling program. I think it was the first in the country. And there's opportunities to be a leader in the recycling of the batteries. They have a lot of critical minerals. So it's important to find ways to try to recycle it if possible. I don't know the actual lifespan of them. I know people who have had their Nissan Leaf for 8 years or 7 years and haven't had to recycle the battery yet. But as with any electronic, as it loses its power, Giovanni's going to laugh at my non-engineer speak, but it loses its charging capacity over time. The more you charge it, it will slowly begin to degrade its charging capacity, but not that significantly. I'll just add to Alder Smith's comment about solar, or question about solar. Hopefully in the next year or so, if you drive up State Street to the CT Transit garage in Hamden across the border, we will probably have that entire roof covered with solar panels. We got approval for that, and we're hoping to do on-site storage of the power so that it will actually store the electricity produced by the solar panels to help charge the buses overnight, to try and incorporate the electric buses and the solar. So just wanted to get that plug in.
Thank you, Mr. Ucalito. Also, just, cost is obviously a concern on many levels between purchasing vehicles as well as setting up stations and regulating the electricity, et cetera. Does the state have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, or any plan goals that they are looking to reach? I know you mentioned the 2032, but what from today until 2032, what types of goals over 3 years, 5 years, et cetera, are there?
Yes, we do. And let me pull up my notes on that. But so we have several different goals in place when it comes to electric vehicles and charging. So DEEP has issued like an EV roadmap of sorts to lay out a path forward over the next 5 years and greater for electric vehicles in our state. But we also have various state laws that have been passed by the General Assembly. So there was one passed in 2019 that said we have to have 50% of light duty cars and trucks. So passenger vehicles, pickup trucks, small pickup trucks. So 50% of those by 2030 purchased that year have to be electric. And 30% of our buses purchased that year have to be electric. So those are in statute and we have to meet that. I'm not concerned about the buses. I hope by 2030, 100% of my buses purchased that year are electric. I hope this is the last year I ever purchase a diesel bus. I think that's possible because they have a 12-year lifespan. But the 50% of light duty vehicles by 2030 purchased that year, I think that's possible as well in Connecticut state government, but those are the goals that the General Assembly put in place for us. And then we've also signed something called the Zero Emission Vehicle MOU. Governor Malloy signed that in 2013, committing to deploy 125,000 electric vehicles in Connecticut by 2025. Unfortunately, in Connecticut, I think only 1,000 as of today are registered in Connecticut. So we have a long way to go in 4 years. And then we've also committed, Governor Lamont signed the medium and heavy duty ZEV, Zero Emission Vehicle MOU. He signed that last year. So he's committed to, by 2050, having 100% of all medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state be electric. I think the technology will definitely be there by then. Hopefully it needs to be there much sooner. But those two MOUs are signed by multiple states all across the country as a commitment.
Okay, I guess the only concern is how realistic is it? Because we know that a lot of the vehicles were not there yet. for those goals. Hopefully we will be, and the developers and research and development will step it up if they haven't already to accommodate those goals. But thank you for that clarification. Thank you for your presentation. I'm going to open it back up to my colleagues. If they have any additional questions, just raise your hand. If not, I will open it up to the public. Okay, seeing no hands, I will open it up for the public to ask any questions, beginning with Kevin McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy, I see you have joined.
First of all, let me thank everyone for participating in this. And I just want to say that there are—
Mr. McCarthy, just a reminder, state your name and address for the record, please. No, that's okay.
Of course. Kevin McCarthy, 171 Bradley Street in New Haven. First of all, I do want to thank all the alders and presenters. One thing which I think Giovanni Zinn mentioned is that there are, in fact, a lot of options here, a lot of paths. One quick response to Alder Nicola's question at the beginning about the capacity of the distribution system. UI actually has looked at this to some extent, and the answer is that it varies. There are parts of town where the capacity of the system to either take on additional demand or to take on production of power from renewable energy systems is limited. It really varies by the circuit that you're talking about and where on the circuit you're located. But this is a solvable problem. And I think I'm very impressed with all the work that city staff and the alders are doing in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Are there any questions for Mr. McCarthy from our panel? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our next person, which is Agatha Perot. And excuse me if I'm announcing that wrong. And just as a reminder to the public, please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Agatha Perot. I live 548 Orange Street in New Haven. I'm a member of the New Haven Climate Movement, and I'm also a sustainability analyst for the Johns Hopkins University. I am going to, I'm going to focus essentially on buildings. I think that electrification of buildings is an essential strategy to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions of the building sector. Buildings generate a large proportion of annual greenhouse gas emissions. In New Haven, electrification is one of the few strategies which can make buildings carbon neutral. This is particularly the case in Connecticut, where Governor Lamont has set a goal for the electric grid to be powered only by clean energy by 2040. As many before me have said, electrification is not only a desirable strategy, it's also a really feasible one. All of the technologies for replacing gas heating, hot water production, cooking, and clothes drying with electric alternatives are available and they're mature. There's been a lot of talk on why we chose 2030. I just want to remind everyone that we do need to electrify fast. We are set to use all of our carbon budget to stay under 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. And while I understand that we might need to make exceptions for some types of vehicles or some buildings, it is a really important goal, and it is important to stay on track. As Giovanni said, during the fall semester, I've done a lot of work with Juliana Nojheim, a Yale student, to study the potential for electrifying New Haven's buildings. We found that the municipal buildings are great candidates for electrification, and we built a plan for all city buildings to be electrified. I'm really glad to hear that the city has started working on some of those projects. I just want to share with you 2 key lessons that emerged from our work. We have found that electrification combined with weatherization is often the most cost-effective strategy, It also has many co-benefits as it contributes to improving occupants' comfort and increasing the value of buildings. Electrification is also most cost-effective when it occurs during construction of a new building or a major retrofit, and also when major equipment needs to be replaced. So when they arise, those opportunities should not be missed. The last thing that I really want to insist on is that the city of New Haven needs to approach this work not only as an internal thing, but with the intention of having an impact beyond its buildings portfolio. And this can be done in a myriad of ways, such as implementing replicable solutions, communicating broadly on the benefits of electrification to other building owners in the city, and training local contractors to these new solutions to make sure to create jobs in New Haven. So all in all, I think that this resolution will affirm the city's intention to conduct this crucial work and set an example for other cities to do so as well. So I really support it, and I hope that the Board of Elders will vote in favor of it. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to testify, and I'm ready for questions if people have them.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from our committee? I don't see any, so thank you again for your testimony.
Thank you.
Chris Schweitzer is next on the list, but I don't.
Yes, I'm here.
There you are.
I'm here. I disappeared for a second. I'm not sure why, but thank you. My name's Chris Schweitzer. I'm at 361 Elm Street, New Haven, and thank you all very much for putting all the time into considering this resolution. I work with New Haven Climate Movement, and you all voted in favor of the climate emergency resolution. And as many of you know, we face an unprecedented climate crisis that threatens to destroy pretty much everything we care about on Earth. Like, it's really, really, really scary and extremely dangerous. And the natural systems are beginning to run out of control. So we need to act very soon. And as has been said, electrification is a great tool to do that. And we really should stop fossil fuels in 2010 use, because we're seeing the damage, as you all know. So we're way past like when we should stop, but we are where we are right now in 2021. And electrification does a lot of great things. And we were looking through the resolution and through this work, electrification, and special thanks to Alder Winter for putting all the work into finalizing the resolution. But we really hope the city can play a leadership role, as Agatha was just saying, not only in doing work on its own buildings, its own fleet, but showing the public, showing local businesses, showing universities that this is the way to go, that we can really make a big impact on so many fronts. And if you think about what 91 and 95 as far as the pollution and noise and impact on the Hill, on Fairhaven, on different neighborhoods and all that damage done, and think what would that would be like if those were all electric vehicles. Like the potential, the future potential is really important, is really significant. Just to mention about questions about whether, you know, this is cost effective or whether we can afford these things, right? We don't put costs on the use of fossil fuels today. There isn't a cost when you buy a gallon of gas for the public health damage done to the children on Dixwell Avenue. It's not, there's no cost to long-term, you know, shortening our lifespans because of the pollution costs. There's not a cost for climate change long damage when we buy a gallon of gas. Those costs are externalized. So I think we really talk seriously about, can the city afford this or can we do this? We should really have an accounting measure or accounting policy for including the carbon costs or long-term climate damage, to really be honest about what we're deciding on as far as using fossil fuel, buying a piece of equipment going forward, that if you're buying a new vehicle, a car or something, those costs fairly should be included, right? So one of the other things about the electrification resolution is, you know, New Haven's in the middle of a construction boom. There's buildings going up all over the place, and every new building that's built can be built all electric, or it can be built with all this gas infrastructure. And once it's built, it's going to be around for 30 years. So it's another 30 years of pollution and climate damage. And it is possible, as Alder Winter and others have pointed out, to build other kinds of buildings. And for example, the new hotel going up by IKEA is a passive construction hotel, apparently the first in the country that uses no fossil fuels. So like it is possible to go in a different direction, and we really hope the city can take this on and be aggressive and also use its public voice, the alder speaking out, the mayor speaking out, and encouraging other partners to step up on this, because we really can have an impact on public health and well-being of New Haven. And finally, I just want to encourage you guys to vision, like, what would 2030 look like if everything's electric? Like, imagine you're standing the corner of Church and Chapel, normally a really busy, noisy, kind of stinky corner with pollution and noise. Like, it would be so different. Or getting up in the morning and hearing the birds. I live downtown and hear garbage trucks and all sorts of stuff, and you need machinery, but it could be very different, right? Like, it's just or going to East Rock Park and having quiet in the park because there's noise. Like, we could have a very different vision, and New Haven could be really help move this city, but also help be a lead in the state and help support the state doing much more. Again, thank you all very much. I know these tough issues and a lot to work on.
Thank you for bringing out some very good points. And you're right, the parks would be much more pleasant, and going downtown would be too. So thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. If there's anyone from the committee that would like to ask any questions, just raise your hand. I don't see any. Thank you again for your testimony. We will move on to Anya Mobarak.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to be reading the Electric Future Manifesto.
And Anya, just for the record, we need your name and address. Thank you. Did we lose? Oh.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. We lost you for a
perfect.
little bit. If you could just state your name and address for the record, that would be great.
Yeah, my name's Anya Mubarak, and I live at 44 Holly Road in Hamden, Connecticut. And I'm just going to be reading the Electric Future Manifesto, which is part of our public education campaign. So here it goes. Electric is more efficient, electric is quiet, electric is safer, electric vehicles produce much less waste heat, electric vehicles don't create air pollution, electric cooking doesn't create indoor air pollution, electric motors require much less maintenance, electric future can be powered 100% by Connecticut-produced energy, keeping billions of dollars in Connecticut each year. Electric use is less harmful to nature with less noise, heat, and pollution. Electric uses far less damage for future generations to clean up. Electric, clean, quiet motors are better for workers' health. Electric future means yes, less utility expense. Electrification paves the way to a carbon-free future as Connecticut electricity gets less carbon intense. Connecticut electricity is already 50% carbon-free, and electric options and technologies in transportation and heating and cooling are advancing and use is accelerating. Electric is already very popular, effective, and powers most of our important tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. Appreciate your words. And next for testifying is Adrian Hugh. Is Adrian on? There you go. Hi, Adrian.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Adrian Huck. I'm a member of the New Haven Climate Movement, and my address is 19 Commodore Hole Drive in Derby, Connecticut. And like I mentioned, I'm an 18-year-old organizer with the New Haven Climate Movement, and I'm here to testify in support of the electrification resolution. To echo some of the sentiment by Anya, an electric future can be powered 100% by energy produced in Connecticut, and that would keep billions of dollars in our state each year. There's also many numerous benefits, including that going electric creates less damage for future generations to clean up than the well-known destruction caused by fossil fuel use. And also going electric would result in less utility expenses in the long term. The use of electric options and technologies in transportation, as well as in heating and cooling, is accelerating. So electric is already very popular and effective. Electrification paves the way to a carbon-free future, and it builds on Connecticut's effort as a state for already achieving 50% carbon-free power statewide. And so I believe that it's time for the city of New Haven to take a step towards adopting an electric future in line with Connecticut's goals already. And so overall, like Mr. Schweitzer was saying, it is a climate emergency, and it's imperative that the Board of Alders addresses this emergency through proactive climate policy and commitments. We really need to think boldly. We have a strict deadline basically as a world by 2030, and it's going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot of sacrifices that are going to be made, but it's truly a crisis, and the youth need our adults to step up. So I hope you all will support our electrification resolution and take this imperative step towards moving New Haven off of fossil fuels and really just setting the city up for a cleaner energy future for the youth now and for future generations, and to protect the planet that we all share. So thank you so much for the work that's already gone into this, and we hope that you'll support us.
Thank you, Adrienne. Any questions from the panel? Okay, we will move on to Kathy Fay. Kathy, if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Okay, I can't start my video. I'm not sure why. Hold on. My name is Kathy Fay, and I am a resident of New Haven at 61 Springside Avenue. And I'm also here to testify in favor of this resolution. But I have to give a lot of disclaimers, so I apologize. But as most of you know, I am a member of the New Haven Environmental Advisory Council, and I am not speaking on behalf of the council, but they know that I'm going to be speaking tonight. And I'm a member of the New Haven Energy Task Force, which concerns itself with these types of things, but is not a city commission. But most importantly, I work for Neighborhood Housing Services, and I'm operating a program called I Heart My Home, CT. And so you need to know what we do is we're working to help residents become more energy efficient and ultimately to electrify. And so that's why I'm testifying, but of course, I want you to know that that's also what I'm doing for a living. So my house, I've electrified at home. I am on heat pumps for my heating and cooling, as well as for my hot water. And I also use an induction cooker for my meals. And so I've made all the mistakes of an early adopter, and I've also worked in home energy, in rehabbing houses and home energy work for many, many years. So I wanted to just explain how it works for residents. For a residential property to become electrified, the house first has to be made, or any building really, has to first be made energy efficient. That means it needs to be insulated properly and air sealed, and any health and safety barriers within the house have to be remediated first. So what that means is that as a matter of course, the health and safety of the occupants is being addressed, and the comfort of the occupants is being addressed. And that makes that boosts the efficiency of the equipment that's installed, because it's not heating or cooling the great outdoors. And with climate change, we're going to see that we're going to have intensified heat in the summer. And the fact that the heat pump heats and cools is really an important safety measure. Many of us have air conditioning, but we certainly don't all have air conditioning. And then for the heat pump hot water heaters, they also provide dehumidification. So all of that mold in our old basements and all that gets mitigated substantially by having the dehumidification unit right in the basement as part of your hot water heater. It's just part of how it works. So I've kind of touched on residential health, safety, and comfort. But another question that came up earlier was about jobs. And I just want to point out, because of all these steps that get taken, it's not just electricians that are going to have more work, but there's going to be greater and greater demand for light contractor work, home energy solutions technicians, insulation workers, barrier remediation workers, that's like asbestos and mold and other health and safety barriers. There'll be an increase in all of these types of work as we continue along the path to electrification. And so I just wanted, there's a lot of things that other people have already said, so I don't want to repeat those things. But also as we go more and more toward electrification and we go more and more toward local solar installations, we are going to see a lot more energy storage that will help to keep the grid more stable. Because if you're using solar and powering your electric, that takes demand off of the grid. And whether it's your electric vehicle or whether it's your battery storage in your basement, you have some backup power if there happens to be an outage. So these are just some, these are kind of minor compared to a lot of the points that others were making, but I just wanted to make sure that you have the whole picture. So very strongly in support of this, and thank you all so much for your work, especially all the winter, but all of the members of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay, for your testimony. You actually brought up some very good points to consider and some steps to think about in addition to the conversation we had this evening. So thank you for that. At this time, there is Chris DeBellis, who is on next for testimony. And Chris, if you could state your name and address for the record, that would be appreciated. Chris, can you hear us? And if you can, you are muted. So Chris, I'm just going to move on to the next testimony and come back to you because we can't hear you or see you. And the next speaker is Yaning Zhao. And excuse me if I pronounced your name wrong, but if you could state your name and address for the record, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So hi, you can call me Tracy, Tracy Joe, and current address is 304 York Street, New Haven. And I'm here with the New Haven Climate Movement. Thank you all for the testimony, for listening to all the testimony. There's not much I have to say that hasn't been said by experts who know a lot more about all of this than I do. But I guess some things to reemphasize. I think in the 2015 greenhouse gas inventory done for the city of New Haven, transportation and buildings emissions combined to form about 70% of the emissions. So by addressing that, you are doing a significant amount to address the carbon emissions. And I think all the questions about sufficient technology to do electrification cost effectively, they're all very valid considerations, but it's also worth noting that this is kind of a two-way street and that enough good technology already exists for the city to start making some very meaningful changes And in some ways, starting with those changes is probably going to be more impetus for the market to create even more and better technologies that can later be adopted, like maybe some sorts of larger vehicles that currently don't have good electric alternatives. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm going to go back to Chris DeBellis. And if you are ready to give your testimony, just unmute yourself. Okay, we still can't hear you or see you. At this time, I'm just going to open it up to see if there are any further residents that would like to testify on this matter. I see a hand. Oh.
Alder, can I make one quick disclaimer?
I was just going to say, I see Mr. McCarthy back on. Yes. Go ahead. Just state your name and address once again for the record.
Sure. It's Kevin McCarthy, 171 Bradley Street. And the first two disclaimers that Kathy Fay made also apply to me. I'm vice chair of the Environmental Advisory Council. I'm on the Energy Task Force, but I am only speaking for myself here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see a hand up, Mr. Schweitzer.
Yes, just a couple quick comments, if I may. One is the state predicts that the electricity.
You'll need to, I'm sorry, you'll need to state your name and address once again for the record.
Chris Schweitzer, 361 Elm Street, New Haven. And just to throw in quickly, two things. One, the state predicts that the electricity coming from Eversource and UI in 2025 will be 91% clean energy from nuclear, from wind, from solar, whatever sources. But that's pretty significant to say that the electrification will really have an impact in cutting greenhouse gases drastically, that any building or car that's running off electric in 2026 will get 91% clean energy. So that's really great. The second thing is, and this kind of goes to our New Haven climate movement's push to try to get more investment in city staff. I mean, this discussion highlights just what a lot of challenges there are, and having dedicated energy staff to help Giovanni and help others, planning department, move this ahead just seems really important. And the other piece of that is having city staff that can help make sure, maybe in economic development, that New Haven businesses and workers get the work coming down the pike. As Kathy Fay and others are mentioning, there are a lot of jobs in play, and the risk is that people in Hartford or Boston or someplace else get these jobs. And we really would like to have this energy revolution, which is coming, be done by New Haven people. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to testify on this topic? Please raise your hand. For a second time, is there anyone from the public that would like to testify? Please raise your hand. And for the third time, anyone from the public that would like to testify on this topic, please raise your hand.
Madam Chair, I move that we close the public section.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, the public testimony has been moved and seconded. Is everyone, I'm going to call your names if you are for or against it. Alder DeCola.
Yes.
Alder Roth.
Yes.
Alder Winter. Alder Winter, sorry, didn't.
Yes.
Thank you. Alder Singh.
Yes.
Alder Smith. And I am a yes. So the yeas have it. The public portion is officially closed. Would anyone like to move the item?
I move the item.
Second.
Okay, the item has been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the item?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think this is a way that we need to start moving forward in trying to clean our environment for our city and our children. There's many hurdles involved in this, but I think it's the right direction. I commend my colleague, Winter, Mr. Winter, that he moved forward with this and worked very hard on it. So I'm in favor of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair DeCola. Alder Singh, I see your hand up.
Madam Chair, I'm in favor of this bill here, and it is the right way to go. Second thing that came to my thought, I know this is going forward in the future, and for a vehicle that charging home, I'm not an expert in this, but probably something we need to talk about. It's regarding our building code for residential, that would need a charging port if our codes need to change. So building that building in the next few years, that would be, capable of having a charging port, and other buildings in the city that's going forward that, I don't want to say mandate, but should, like you says, some place need to have a handicap. Should we look at providing so much charging port? That's some of my thought is going forward. If we can think about that, if we're going to promote this, that we need to make it that accessible to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Singh. Any other committee members? Alder Roth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too want to thank Alder Winter and all the people who have been working hard on this issue. I mean, it's critical. Basically, we have no alternative. We can't not act on this. And so I'm supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Roth. Anyone else from the committee that would like to say anything? Alder Winter, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge, other alders who provided feedback and support on the drafting of this. I was certainly not all my effort. Alder DeCola provided a lot of feedback, as did Majority Leader Furlow, Alders Brackeen, Edwards, Carmen Rodriguez. So it very much has been a collaboration. And just to speak quickly to 2 points. One, to Alder Singh's question, I do think that there's significant work for us to do, particularly through the zoning code, to try to incentivize those installations, especially on the larger buildings. And one of the intentions for this resolution would be to direct the city plan staff to take on that work. And then I do think what the public testimony spoke to was, the need to be setting a goal. And while not all the technology might be there for, an electric snowplow, that goal can help us shape policy, and that it'll also help private industry as they look to phase out their internal combustion engines. And we are already seeing that to a degree, right? So like Volvo, for example, is a really large company that makes both huge trucks and also cars. And they've said by 2030 that they will be completely electric. So I think if they can do it, it's not an unreasonable goal for us as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Winter. I'll say a few words. First of all, thank you, Alder Winter, for taking the lead on this, and for Alder DeCola for assisting, as well as all the other alders that you mentioned. I think this is an initiative that is inevitable. We're going to have to move forward to electrify our cars and our buildings, and it's everyone's responsibility, from the manufacturers down to the resident. Of course, we're going to have to do some educating as well, because it is somewhat complex as it is easy. But it's something that I, as a New Haven resident, as well as part of this committee, am proud to support and encourage my colleagues to support as well. with that being said, goals can always be updated. We're starting to set these goals in the right direction. And with that, changes may occur with whatever comes up. For example, we don't have everything that's been electrified. So once those objects, those widgets come out, then our goals can be updated to reflect those changes. So again, I encourage everyone to support this bill. And if there is anyone else who would like to add anything, please raise your hand from the committee. If not, we will take a vote on this resolution. Okay, seeing no other hands up, we will vote, beginning with my vice chair, Alder DeCola.
Yes.
Alder Roth.
Yes.
Alder Winter.
Yes.
Alder Singh.
Yes.
Alder Smith. And I am a yes. The yeas have it. I guess I should say any nays and any abstentions. Seeing none, the yeas have it. So we will move on with this resolution to the full board.
Madam Chair, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is anyone against adjourning? Alder DeCola.
I vote yes to adjourn.
Alder Roth.
Yes.
Alder Winter.
Yes to adjourning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alder Singh.
Yes to adjourn.
And I'm a yes to adjourning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening to listen to an important topic. Have a very